Hello, Scoliosis Dialogue listeners. This is Cynthia Nguyen from Shriners Medical Center in Pasadena. I have a very special guest today in honor of June Scoliosis Awareness Month. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Lindsay Ellingson, who is the co-founder of Wander Beauty, former Victoria's Secret angel model, and mother of two. Thank you so much for joining us today, Lindsay.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to chat with you.
Yeah, we want to start out by hearing about your scoliosis journey.
Sure. So right now I'm 37 and I was diagnosed with scoliosis in fourth grade. So I was a gymnast and I was in gymnastics, and long story short, my coach noticed kind of one side of my back was raised a bit more than the other side as he was like pushing me down in like the middle splits. And so he referred me, or he recommended that I see a doctor. I was diagnosed with scoliosis. I had an S-shaped curve and I was immediately braced for 23 and a half hours a day. I have no clue like how things work nowadays, but that just seemed so extreme to me at the time. And so I was put into this brace. I had to quit gymnastics. It was like a huge bummer. And so I was in a brace 23 and a half hours a day. Once I got into sixth grade, I just was so over the brace, and, this was against my doctor's recommendation, but I tried out for the dance team. I made the dance team. And so I started taking my brace off for like dance practice and competitions, and my curve just got worse and worse. But I had some normalcy in my life. So I was so happy about that. It was kind of a trade-off for me. And who knows if the brace was really even working for me. I'm not really sure about that either. But so in eighth grade, between seventh and eighth grade that summer, I ended up having to have a spinal fusion surgery. My curves got to, I think it was like 54 degrees and 57 degrees. So it was a significant curve. So I had spinal fusion surgery that summer. And I went into that surgery definitely like really afraid, worried that I wouldn't be able to dance again. I did a lot of preparation mentally and physically to get ready for the surgery. And, overall, I had a really good experience with it. I had an amazing doctor, Dr. Tolo, and I was so surprised that, I got out of the surgery with very minimal pain. And within 6 months, I was dancing again. So that's a kind of condensed version of my scoliosis journey.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Overall, it was a good experience. Do you remember any specific things that you found helpful that Dr. Tolo or other folks on his team did for you so that you felt more comfortable going into the procedure?
Yeah, one thing that really sticks out, it was so long ago, but one thing that really sticks out is Dr. Tolo had a scrapbook of all of his previous patients and things that they were doing like post-op, like 6 months post-op, once they were able to move again. A lot of them were like mountain biking, water skiing, golfing, dancing. And so that gave me a lot of hope and reassurance about the surgery that I wouldn't be limited in any physical way.
That's great. Do you have any advice for young women who are going to have the surgery upcoming or who may be a little worried about having the surgery?
Yeah, I mean, I totally understand how scary it is. It's a big surgery. It's a long surgery. But honestly, I think that was such a defining moment in my life. I developed such like a depth of character. I was so much stronger coming through that. And from that day on, I set so many goals for myself because I was like, oh my gosh, if I could get through that, I could do anything. I just felt so empowered. It was so crazy. But I really, I would recommend mentally and physically preparing yourself for surgery. And then beyond that, just know that it's not going to limit you. It's just like a moment in your life. You're going to go on to live an amazing life after that. And yeah, I think it's a lot about your mentality going into it.
That's awesome. And you certainly have done so many impressive things since then. Did you resume competitive dancing after your procedure?
I did. So after the 6 months, I started dancing again. I danced all through high school. And that was so great. I really think that moving and doing yoga and Pilates and dance has really helped keep the mobility in the areas of my back that still can move. Obviously I'm not a doctor, but I feel like that was like a good thing to do. And I danced in college at UC San Diego. And I just remember the crazy things I was doing, like, almost like kind of like, I don't know, I don't even remember what it was called because I haven't danced in so long, but like these really high kicks where you're bending backwards and like bending your back so much. Like I had a little bit of movement in my lower back and I really used that. And so it was so much fun and just so great to be able to move my body despite the fusion. And most people couldn't even tell that I had these rods in my back, which was so cool.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, we certainly encourage everyone to stay active and do the things that they love throughout their entire lives. Did it feel, I know it's a long time ago, but did it feel different dancing after the surgery versus before the surgery?
It definitely felt different. In the center of my back I had less mobility, but like I said, I was still able to move in the lower part of my back, which I felt like was the most important part. And so if there was ever a move that I didn't feel comfortable with, I would just like let my coach know, and they were totally understanding. I just really listened to my body, but I think it was only like a true back bend that I was not able to do physically. Everything else I was really able to do.
Very cool. And so in terms of physicality, it sounds like having the scoliosis surgery didn't limit you in really any way doing the things that you wanted to do. Do you feel like it limited you in any sort of mental way or anything like that?
No. And like I was saying, I think that going through that, I was 13 when I had spinal fusion surgery. I just think going through such a difficult experience like that really creates this like depth of character, and this brings out this inner strength that you didn't even know that you had. And so I think at 13, I think that mentally I became much stronger. The second I got into high school, I was like, I want to be top 10 in my class. So I worked so hard. And I do think it was related to that because I just felt so empowered after getting through that surgery. And I remember driving home from the hospital after having that spinal fusion surgery and not feeling any pain, and just almost like this rush of adrenaline, like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. And I got through this because I was so scared going into it. And so it just makes it almost is like a spark in your brain of like, oh my gosh, what else can I do if I can get through that? So that was my experience with it. And I hope that so many other people have that experience too.
Very cool. Well, Lindsay, a lot of my patients who are going to undergo spine surgery ask me about the scar afterwards. As someone who was a Victoria's Secret angel, do you feel like you were ever bothered by your scar, or that it kept you from doing or feeling a certain way?
No, I'm actually so proud of my scar. And for the longest time before I had kids, I always said this is like one of my most proudest things is the scar on my back, because it was such an important time in my life and something that I overcame and was stronger and better because of it. But now it's my children that have taken that spot. But I'm really proud of my scar, and it's I've walked on hundreds, if not thousands of runways. And I never had a makeup artist go in to like cover it up with concealer. It was always there and a part of me. It's also like right along your spine. A lot of times you barely even notice it. So if anybody's worried about that, a lot of times it just kind of disappears.
Great. And before this podcast, I had to do some research. So I did end up looking through your Instagram, and I noticed that for your wedding dress, you chose one that was low in the back.
Yeah.
And I thought that was such an awesome decision. What was your thought process kind of going into that?
I worked with a designer who was a friend of mine, and I just let her do whatever she thought would look great on my body. And she wanted to expose, my back and my scar, and I was all for it and comfortable with that. It's a part of me. And again, it's something that I'm proud of. And I think it's actually kind of a beautiful thing as well. Yeah. So I've been totally comfortable showing it. It's almost, people get tattoos. It almost feels like a tattoo. It has so much meaning to it. It's like a symbol of strength.
Oh, that's a beautiful answer. I love that.
Thank you. And I'm curious for you. I'm curious for you if you have kept in touch with any of your patients who've had children, and if you've heard any experiences.
So I haven't been in practice long enough. I think my oldest patients are probably still in their early 20s. So none
Okay.
at least have reached out and said that they had kids.
Yeah.
But for someone like Dr. Tola, who's been in practice for, gosh, 4 decades or so, I'm sure he's had a lot of patients.
Yeah, definitely. Because that's one thing I'm so glad we're doing this podcast, because that's one thing that maybe I didn't do enough digging, but I didn't really have the resource and like the people to connect with and the other women to talk to who've gone through this before. So I'm hoping that this will reach, other women in my situation who felt a little bit scared or unsure about the whole process.
For sure.
But everybody's so different, obviously everybody's so different depending on where you're fused to. I feel like it all kind of comes down to that.
Yeah.
But overall, it was a good experience.
For sure. And, since during this recording, I was even thinking about that. The SRS is sort of the biggest organization that combines all the practitioners that deal with scoliosis. And so, in an ideal world, we could maybe put like some kind of frequently asked questions type of handout, maybe on the SRS website, or even through Ortho Info, which is where a lot of us get handouts for other conditions. And if we could, even get like a little, I don't know, round table going of people who have had spine surgery and then had kids of like different levels and different experiences. Like some people who've had C-sections, some people who've had, vaginal births like you. I think that would be awesome to put out at some point.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm always around if you guys want to do something like that, or if you need more, if any of your patients or have questions or whatever, I'm always here. So happy to answer and help in any way I can.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And among your, very many awesome and impressive achievements, you're also a super mom to 2 kiddos. Tell us a little bit more about your pregnancy and childbirth journey.
Yeah, so I have 2 kids, 2 boys. Carter is almost 2, and then my littlest one, Rowan, he's almost 4 months. So definitely getting pregnant and being pregnant and everything was a whole new journey, a whole new experience. It was a lot of unknown for me. I didn't know any other women with a spinal fusion who had gotten pregnant and went through labor and everything. So everything was new to me. But my first pregnancy with Carter, the pregnancy itself was totally fine. Like I love being pregnant. I really enjoyed it. Besides the first trimester when you feel nauseous and all that stuff, like every other woman could feel. I felt that in some ways, I know a lot of women without fusion can complain of like lower back pain or sciatic nerve pain. I didn't have any pain in my back or the nerves or anything like that. And part of me thinks it's because I had those bars to kind of keep me stable and gave me like strength carrying those 2 kids. So I thought that was all good.
Well, it's awesome that you didn't have some of the pregnancy low back pain that so many of us experience. I mean, myself, I haven't had spine fusion, and the back pain was rough, but I'm glad you didn't have to deal with that. Can you tell us a little bit of what the actual labor and delivery part was like?
Yeah. So what I knew going into, so I let my doctor know about my spinal fusion, and the group of doctors hadn't known many women with fusion. There was maybe a handful, and this is in New York City at Lenox Hill. And so what they did is they put me in touch with the head of anesthesia. So for other women, I definitely recommend first consulting with your doctor. And if you have an x-ray on hand, that's always great to have. I luckily kept my x-rays that showed how far down I was fused. I was fused to L4, which is pretty low, I think, pretty low, especially for epidural placement, which I found out later. So what I did while I was still pregnant is I consulted with first my doctor and then the head of anesthesia. So those 2 things I definitely recommend doing just to prepare yourself. If it really just depends, from what I understand, it depends on your fusion and how far down you're fused. I think that's what it comes down to. And so in my case, I was kind of this gray area where they weren't sure. So it wasn't very reassuring. They told me they could try it, but they weren't sure if the epidural was going to work. So once I heard that, and that information I learned in about the 2nd trimester, it was about the 2nd trimester when I started really talking about, pain management, things like that. I decided that it was probably the best idea to take hypnobirthing classes. So I connected with a doula. Her company is called The Baby Wagon, and she's in New York. And I connected with her, and we did some virtual, some in-person, because this is like during pre-COVID, also during COVID. I've had 2 pregnancies kind of during this whole COVID experience. So we started off in person and doing hypnobirthing classes, just so that I could learn the proper breathing techniques that you can use through each phase of labor. So that was really, really helpful. My first pregnancy, I was really nervous about the pain. I had only heard horror stories from women, and these are women who had no issues and were able to get epidurals. So I had a lot of fear going into labor. So hypnobirthing, I cannot recommend this enough for women in my situation who are faced with possibly not having the epidural and that extra like pain medication. The women that I really looked to for strength was my mom and my mother-in-law, who both had unmedicated vaginal deliveries. So talking to them and hearing them reassure me about the whole process really gave me a lot of strength and reassurance. So between talking to them, shutting down and not listening to the horror stories, and also taking the hypnobirthing classes, that really helped me to mentally prepare. It is really, again, it all comes down to that mental strength and mind over matter when it comes to getting through labor and just preparing for the chance of not having an epidural. That's what it really came down to for me.
That's great. And so when it was time to actually deliver, did you end up having an epidural and going through it that way, or what happened then?
So for Carter, for my first son, I had him in Ohio because that was during the peak of COVID and we were quarantined on the lake and all this. So I changed hospitals in my last trimester. I got there. My water broke naturally at 3:00 in the morning. I got to the hospital. I had not consulted with their team because of COVID and all this stuff. The head of anesthesia walked in and he was like, "You're having this baby naturally. I'm not doing an epidural on you." So in that case, thank God I had prepared with hypnobirthing. I just wasn't expecting that kind of, I thought he would at least try and just like look at my back. He didn't even look at my back. He was like, "Nope, you're having this baby naturally." So in that situation, I was just like, okay, well, I have the techniques. I was definitely bummed at first, but I was like, I can do this. I'm strong. I have the breathing techniques. I can do this. And it was an amazing experience. Once again, like it's crazy what your mind can do when you really put your mind to something, what you can do. So I would say up until like 6 centimeters, I was totally fine, managing it totally fine. I got to about 6 centimeters and things started getting a little bit challenging. So I started using my breathing techniques, and they offered me an IV medication. I think it was Stadol. And so that really helped me to just relax a bit more. I actually fell asleep. And then I woke up and I felt this like intense pressure. And this is my first time going through labor. So I'm like, what is this? I think this is like the transition part where it gets, where the baby's about ready to come out. I was just like, and when it's your first time, it's all these new feelings are so crazy. And so I'm like, it just feels like so intense and the pressure. But it was not like super painful. It was just like intense. I would describe it more as intense. So basically I took a nap, woke up, intense pressure, and he was ready to come out. And within 45 minutes, I had him.
Great. Wow.
So, and then again, it was that same feeling of like feeling like you're on cloud 9, like, oh my gosh, I got through that. Yeah. He's here. I think there's so many hormones also mixed in with that. I felt so proud of myself and my body for getting through that, despite the challenge of not having that extra pain relief. So my second son, I'll just add this, the New York team was like very, very supportive. They wanted to try to give me the epidural. They placed it perfectly. They had no issues placing the epidural. They were saying that, there could be some risks, some challenges with placing it because of how far down I'm fused and possibly some scar tissue, if there was maybe scar tissue. They ended up being able to place it perfectly, the epidural, but it didn't give me the coverage I needed. So I was not feeling pain kind of like from my hips down, but all of the contractions I could feel. So I was very happy that they were so supportive and wanted to try to see if it would work. But in the end, because of how far down I'm fused, this is not the case for everybody. For me, it didn't work. It didn't work 100%. I would say it worked 50%,
Okay.
which was still something. That was still something, I think. And so that mixed with like a little bit of Stadol to just take the edge off at the end was great. Again, I prepared mentally with hypnobirthing. I would totally recommend hypnobirthing. And also, don't listen to the scary stories and the horror stories that women may share with you. It's important to just stay very positive.
For sure. Yeah. And I mean, you bring up some really great points, Sarah, and thank you so much for sharing your story. Big one. Yeah. Don't listen to the horror stories. There are so many floating around online, and people complaining about different things. But I mean, women are strong, and we
Absolutely
been doing this forever and ever, and people get through this. So that's fantastic. The other point that you bring up that I would like to kind of emphasize is that you knew where you were fused to, and you your X-ray, which is great. And so for all the people out there listening, maybe patients, or even if you're a surgeon, I would encourage making sure that your patients, or if you are the patient, knowing what levels you fused to, because your medical practitioners in the future are going to want to know. And if you can keep a copy of your X-ray, that's super helpful. The research, which we on this podcast will be discussing in a future episode, has shown that there is a difference in terms of your kind of pregnancy journeys and outcomes depending on how low the fusion is. And so for folks like you, Lindsay, who are fused down to L4, it's a little bit different than folks who are fused higher in terms of ease of epidural placement and rate of C-section. So thank you for bringing that up, because that's super important for everyone, medical practitioners and patients, to know that you should know your body and what's inside. The mention of hypnobirthing is a great suggestion. Can you tell us more about what those kind of lessons entail, and exactly what you do to prepare for the hypnobirthing techniques?
Yeah, so hypnobirthing, we did some sessions where she would teach me the proper breathing techniques for each phase of labor. And she would also, I listened to positive birthing affirmations every morning, which I thought were really helpful. I also learned to meditate and to just really relax my body. There's all these different exercises that you can do and that you practice daily leading up to labor, so that you're ready with all those tools, and it just becomes like second nature to relax your body. One thing that I learned is the more that you tense up, the more afraid you are, the more pain you're going to feel. So the more you can relax your body and breathe, and again, I'm not a doctor, but it worked for me. More relaxed, or it just really, and just like letting your body go with the flow, everything happening is so natural. And then there was a book that I read too. The working with a doula was really helpful, and just learning all of those techniques and ways to relax my body was super helpful. And there's a lot of women that I've connected with that don't have any issues with fusion, who wanted to do unmedicated vaginal deliveries, and worked with doulas and did hypnobirthing, and had such an amazing experience with it as well. So I highly recommend it for anybody, not just women who have spinal fusion.
Another point you mentioned was that you were able to kind of have a good conversation with your OB team and the anesthesia team ahead of time. And because of the pandemic, that kind of screwed things up with the first pregnancy. But going into the second pregnancy, you felt comfortable that you had this conversation with them ahead of time. Do you have any advice for OBs or OB anesthesiologists about how they can make things more comfortable and better for pregnant patients who have had spine fusions or scoliosis?
I think it's my team was great. They were really open to, they really took the time to listen to me, listen to my fears. For my second pregnancy, my water broke naturally again, and I was a little bit early. And as soon as I got to the hospital, the plan was to induce me. And I just was so afraid of being induced, because I felt like that was going to bring on the contraction so much stronger. And I actually went into my second pregnancy with a bit more fear, just knowing kind of what to expect. oddly. It was like a weird thing. So I had to prepare a bit more mentally. But what I really appreciated was how they listened to me. They collaborated with me, and they decided to not do the, sorry, I'm doing it. I'm like losing my train of thought. They, I'm so sorry.
Probably going on like only a few hours of sleep too. So
on top of that, and because there's different ways of inducing. And so there was like one thing that she wanted to do to induce me, but I just really didn't want to do that. So she listened to me, and I really appreciated that she listened to me and got things going a bit more gently, and kept in mind that I may not have any pain intervention during the process. So she really listened to me, and I appreciated her being there to listen to me.
That's great. Yeah, I'm glad you had a team that was able to communicate and listen to you. That's so important for anyone undergoing childbirth, but especially if you have any particular fears and you had gone through an experience before that wasn't ideal. So that's great advice. And I hope that there are some OB medical practitioners out there listening to this, because your story is just so important to be heard. And we don't often get the chance to talk to people about these types of experiences. So thank you so much. I also wanted to know a little bit more about kind of what happens after you have the babies. Do you think parenting, especially early on, when you have to pick them up and carry them a lot, is different for you, having had a scoliosis fusion versus if you hadn't?
I do. I think that, like I said, during pregnancy, I had no back pain. I think it has something to do with relaxin. Is it a hormone or something that relaxes your body a bit?
Yeah.
Which so I didn't really have pain during pregnancy. I'm experiencing a bit more pain since giving birth. With my first son, after about 6 months, the pain went away. So I'm about 3.5 months postpartum. And so we'll see. I mean, I think in a couple of months, if the pain hasn't gone away, I'm going to consult with the doctor and just see what's going on. If there's maybe some physical therapy I might need to do to help with the pain. It's not an unbearable pain, but I definitely feel it when I bend down or go to pick them up. But I also think that physically, I think just getting back and moving my body, I've started Pilates. I think that it could also have a lot to do with core strength. My gut says that I just need to really strengthen my core. And I know a lot of women complain about lower back pain even after giving birth. And that's because of that loss of the core strength. So I'm going to work on that as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we carry babies and they sort of stretch out all of our musculature and our core. And then afterwards, that muscle, all those muscles have to get back to where they were before. So yeah, Pilates, I think, is a great option for honestly everyone. But, it's a nice, gentle way of getting some of that core strength back. Is there anything in particular about the way you're lifting your kids that you feel is different for you versus someone else?
I try to not bend over too much to lift and just focus on bending my knees and do so that I'm not putting too much strain on my lower back. Since I'm fused so low, I really try to look out for my lower back. I do wonder, like, in 10 years, how is my lower back going to feel? So I definitely want to keep it healthy, keep it strong. So that's kind of like this next phase of my life, is just like keeping my body moving and healthy, watching the way that I do pick up my kids. My son is about 25 pounds now. So picking him up, I'm working on strengthening those other areas, like my arms and my core and my legs, just so that my body can stay healthy.
Very cool. All right. Thank you so much for, talking to us today. Like I said, we as medical practitioners, we read a lot of papers and research about different things, but getting to actually hear an experience from a patient and, what their experience having the surgery and afterwards, and then, having kids and all that has been just super illuminating for me. And I know it will be for everyone else who listens to this podcast. So thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Any advice that you want to impart upon our listeners and other medical practitioners and patients and whoever else might be listening?
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I think that this is such an important conversation to be had. And I just think that it's so important to work with doctors that you feel comfortable with, comfortable collaborating and talking with. And it's really a team effort. And this is definitely 100% something that you can get through with a little bit of extra mental work. I highly recommend the hypnobirthing for anybody. And even without the pain medication, you can definitely get through this. It is such a natural process that we were born to do this, that our bodies were made to do. So yeah, if anybody has any extra questions for me, I'm happy to answer them. And I hope that this was really helpful.
Thank you.
If you guys have any other questions for me, you can follow me at Lindsay Ellingson. And thank you so much for listening.
The Scoliosis Research Society is a nonprofit professional organization made up of physicians and allied health personnel. Their primary focus is on providing continuing medical education for healthcare professionals and on funding and supporting research in spinal deformities. Please visit srs.org for further information.